In this section of basic fundamentals related to ISO 9001, the first thing which we want to cover here is the 7 quality management principles. Now, these 7 quality management principles are the foundation on which ISO 9001 standard is built. ISO 9001 standard helps organization to provide consistent and good service to their customers, and that is what is the purpose of these 7 quality management principles as well. These principles guide organization to improve their performance and to achieve sustained success. So now let's look at these 7 principles one by one. The first principle is customer focus. The organizations or companies should have customer focus because the success of company depends on the customers. So if customers are happy, the company will prosper and will succeed in the long run. So enhancing customer satisfaction is the key objective of any company. So by having a customer focus, the companies can increase the loyalty of the customer towards their product or service, and then they can get the repeated business and they have a better reputation, and that will help these companies to grow on a sustainable basis. So that is principle number 1, focus on customer or the customer focus. Now coming to the principle number 2, which is leadership or the management of the company. So leadership establishes the purpose and the direction of the company, and the leadership creates a culture in which all the employees work towards a common direction and they achieve the organization's objectives and goals. So that is the role of leadership. So with the involvement of leadership, the companies can move towards their goal and employees will be motivated to work towards that. That is principle number 2. Now coming to principle number 3. So we talked about customer in the principle number 1, we talked about the leadership in principle number 2, and in principle number 3 is engagement of people. Basically here we are talking about employees of the company. So if the employees are competent, they are trained, they are empowered, they engage in the development or the improvement, then company can achieve success. And that way they can deliver high value to their customers will be satisfied and the company will grow. That is the role of employees or the people in the company. So the benefit of engaged employee or the people in company will be the employees will be satisfied, they will be more creative, they will be working hard to achieve the objective of the company, they will have accountability of the work they have been assigned to do. So this is principle number 3, which is related to engagement of people or engagement of employees in the company. So in these 3 principles, we have covered 3 parties here, the customer, the management and the employees. Coming to the principle number 4, which is process approach. So let's understand that in today's environments, companies are complex. There are multiple processes happening in the company. There will be a sales process, there will be a delivery process, there will be maintenance process and so on. So there are multiple processes. If everyone in the organizations work on those predefined processes, set or the consistent processes, then the output also will be consistent. So using those consistent, well-established processes, companies can achieve success because everyone knows what they are expected to do, and that way they will achieve the required results. So benefit of this will be there will be enhanced efficiency because people know what they are supposed to do. Not that one particular work everyone is working on and then there is, let's say, task number 2 which nobody is working on. So if the roles and responsibilities of people are clear in the organization, there are established processes which have been developed over a period of time, which have been improved over a period of time, then using those processes, the companies can achieve consistent results. There will be reduced cost, less rework, and then these people should be working on continuously improving those processes. So this is process approach. This is principle number 4. Now coming to principle number 5, which is improvement. Every successful organization focuses on improving from wherever they are. So improvement is a continuous process. So at whatever stage you are, you still try to improve and move forward, make things better, deliver more value to your customers. And continuous improvement should be a permanent objective of the company. So at whatever stage you are, the companies or the employees need to keep working towards the continuous improvement. By doing that, the companies can reduce their cost, they can deliver higher value to their customer, and they can reduce the risk which are internal or external and work on the opportunities. So improvement in the processes will help companies to grow. This is principle number 5. Now coming to the principle number 6, which is evidence-based decision making. So rather than working on gut feeling, all the decisions in the company should be made based on the fact, based on the data or the information which is available. That way, your decisions will be good and they will result in the positive outcome. So this is evidence-based decision making. By doing that, you can make generally right decisions, you can be more predictable, you can be more accurate, and that way the companies can increase or enhance their performance. So this is principle number 6, which is evidence-based or the fact-based decision making. Now coming to the last principle in this, which is relationship management. So here we want to make relationship with our suppliers, with our customers, with our employees. So that way we will have sustained success if all the interested parties are working together towards the common goal. Now here mainly when we are talking about relationship management, the focus is a little bit more on supplier. And if you remember earlier, we did talk about the customer, we did talk about the leadership or the management, we did talk about the employees, we did not talk about suppliers. So basically that's what is covered in principle number 7 when we are talking about relationship management, to maintain relationship with our internal and external stakeholders, including our suppliers. So that way we can optimize the supply chain performance and we can increase the trust amongst the stakeholders, and that will lead to the long-term stability. So these are the 7 basic fundamental principles or the quality management principles based on which the ISO 9001 standard is built. So here is a brief summary of these 7 quality management principles. First is that they form the basis of quality management system. So any quality management system should be built upon these 7 fundamental principles. And these principles help in improving performance, enhance the sustainability, and lead to the long-term success of the organization. And at this stage, you might just want to stop and think that how these 7 principles fit into your organization. And do you see any area where you can improve upon? Right now, we have not gone into ISO 9001 standard. We have just looked at the foundation principles. So look into these. Think about how do they fit into your organization. So that was the first fundamental concept which we covered. The next thing which we will be talking is the process approach. So we did talk about the process approach in one of the quality management principles, but let's talk about that in more detail in the next video. Previously, when we were talking about quality management principles, the 7 quality management principles, the principle number 4 was process approach. Now let's talk about that in a little bit more detail, because when we say ISO 9001 based quality management system, the process approach is important because ISO 9001 standard is built upon and emphasizes the process approach of management. Now, what is process approach? Basically, in process approach, you are expected or the companies are expected to understand the processes which these companies are executing. These processes have interrelationship with each other. For example, let's say sales or manufacturing or production or dispatch. These are not isolated processes. There is always an interrelationship between these processes. For example, when manufacturing does the manufacturing, it depends on lot many things. It depends on procurement to get the right input material. It depends on design. It depends on the sales department to understand the needs of the client. So there is an interrelationship between these processes. So understanding the processes and understanding the relationship between them is important aspect of ISO 9001 standard. And ISO 9000 heavily emphasizes on using the process-based approach. Here are the key concepts of process approach. The first thing is that the processes are interrelated. We did talk about that earlier, that the processes are not isolated. The production is not isolated. Production depends on sales, production depends on design, production depends on procurement, and so on. So there is interrelationship between them, and recognizing these interdependencies is important part of understanding these processes. And each process has some inputs, and these inputs are the resources or the information what they need, and they have some output. Output could be in the terms of the product which this company is making or the service this company is providing. So that's the output. So for any process, there will be some input and then there will be some output. And also there will be some suppliers of the input and then there will be some consumers or the users of the output. So you need to understand those when you are developing the quality management system. For any process, there will be input, there will be output, and there will be a feedback mechanism as well. Depending on the output, you might want to change your inputs. So there's a feedback mechanism, and then there are some controls also which are used to control the inputs, to control the process, and to control the output. In addition to that, prior to inputs, you will see a box which says the source of inputs. So basically, this is suppliers. And then at the end, there are receivers of the output. So basically, these are the customers who are receiving the output. So this particular diagram is generally called as input process output. But then in Six Sigma term, there is a diagram called SIPOC. SIPOC is a supplier, input, processes, output, and the customer. So basically, this is sort of a SIPOC diagram. So you might need to have these type of diagrams to understand the processes which are being executed in your organization when you are starting to implement the quality management system. So this is the process approach. Now here is an example, a very simple example of, let's say the process is related to the customer order. So when you are receiving customer orders, the inputs would be the customer requirements is an input, the order details is the input, the product specification is the input, or input could be the raw material which you are using for the production, that is input. And then there are process steps. So in the process, you are doing the order receipt, you are doing some processes, you are doing manufacturing, quality control, packaging, delivering. So these are the processes which you are doing, and then the output will be the final product or the final service which you are delivering, leading to the customer satisfaction. So here is the summary of what we have discussed. The process approach which is used in ISO 9000, basically that ensures that we consistently meet the needs of the customer, we give value to the customer, and we achieve the required performance, and that would lead to, and this also would lead to the continual improvement in the organization. That's what is the basic purpose of the process approach. And the obvious benefit of this will be by using process approach, you will be able to provide the consistently good quality product or service to your customers, and that will lead to the long-term success of the company. So this is a brief introduction to the process approach. So when you look into ISO 9001 standard, when you look into quality management system, think about the process approach, think about the input process output, and also think about this, that these processes have a lot of interrelationship. These processes are not in isolation. So having that understanding will help you in developing a proper quality management system for your organization. Now the next concept which we will be talking is the risk-based thinking, which is a new concept introduced in ISO 9001 2015 version. So let's talk about that in the next video. when ISO 9001 2015 version was issued, one thing which was surprising in that was ISO 9001 has removed the reference to the preventive action. So prior to 2015 version, there used to be corrective actions and the preventive actions. But in 2015 version, the preventive action has been removed from the standard. So now the standard only has correction and corrective action. So there is no preventive action. The intent of preventive action was to take some actions to avoid the occurrence of any problem in the first place itself. So it has nothing to do once the problem has happened. The preventive action was to do something to avoid a problem from happening in the first place itself. So now that preventive action has been removed, and that was basically replaced with the risk-based thinking. Now risk-based thinking was covered in clause 6.1 and few other places, and we will talk about those details later on. But right now let's understand that in 2015 version, the preventive action was replaced by risk-based thinking. Now what is this risk-based thinking? Risk-based thinking is a preventive tool. What you want to do is think about the risks, what could happen, what could go wrong, what could go extremely good. So both things, you are looking at things which could go bad or things which could go in the favor of the company. So the positive risk and the negative risk, think about them and take actions based on the risk. So whatever you are doing in quality management system or ISO 9001, that should be appropriate to the risk. So if the risk is high, you will put more control, you will put more checks and balances. And if the risk is low, then you will have less checks and balances in that. So your decision should be based on risk, and that itself is a preventive tool. And that has also helped in reducing the prescriptive demands or the prescriptive requirements. So now ISO 9001 2015 is not that much prescriptive. It leaves a lot many things for company to decide based on the type of risk they are facing. So companies can take action appropriate to the level of risk. And that gives some flexibility to the company, some flexibility related to the processes, flexibility related to the level of documentation they need to do, or the roles and responsibilities they need to have for that particular activity. It all depends on the level of risk that particular activity has. And ISO 9001 standard asks for applying risk-based thinking to all quality management principles, which is covered in clause number 4.4. 4.4 basically tells about how to set up the quality management system. So in that clause, it tells that the system should be appropriate to the level of risk. Another thing to remember is that when we are talking about risk-based thinking, it is risk-based thinking. It is not risk management process. So companies are not obliged to put a risk management process in place, a formal risk management process. It could be informal. Again, it depends on the level of risk. So it's a risk-based thinking only, not the risk management process which the companies need to implement. And basically, that leaves a lot of flexibility with the companies to decide on what level of documentations they need, what level of processes they need to define, what level of records they need to keep. It all depends on the level of risk which the company sees based on the factors in which this company is working. So this is risk-based thinking. Now the next basic concept which we will be talking is the PDCA cycle. Let's talk about that in the next video. Now coming to the next fundamental concept which we want to discuss before we start talking about ISO 9001 standard. And this concept is the PDCA cycle. This cycle was developed by quality guru Walter Shewhart, and later this was popularized by Dr. Deming. Now what is this PDCA cycle? We will talk about that on the next slide, but this is a systematic approach of problem solving and continuous improvement. So by using PDCA cycle, you can do problem solving and you can enhance the performance or continuously improve the performance of the organization. Now what is PDCA? Now PDCA is P is for plan, D is for do, C for check, and A for act. So this is a cycle for any activity you do, particularly any continuous improvement activity. You need to follow a PDCA cycle. So in the plan part, you establish the objectives or the goal, what you want to achieve. You think about the processes which you want to work on. And here you also look at the customer requirements, what does customer want, and you look at the policies and procedures of the company. So this is the planning part, planning for any event. Whether this is for the company or whether this is your any personal thing which you want to do, the first thing what you want to do is plan for that. Once you have done the planning, then you do that. Here you implement whatever planning you have done, all the processes, all the thinking, what you have done, you now implement that. That's the do part. Once you have done that, whatever you wanted to do, then you need to check that. Check against what you were thinking to achieve and what actually you achieved. So you compare that, you look at the gap, whether you were able to achieve your objective or not. And then based on those gaps between what was expected and what you achieved, you act. So here you take actions on those gaps which you found as a part of check. So this is the PDCA cycle, and this keeps on repeating. So once you have taken action on act part, then you again plan, you again do, you check and act. So this continuous cycle keeps on working. So this is PDCA cycle. So when we talk of ISO 9001 standard, this standard is also based on the PDCA cycle. This is based on the 7 quality management principles which we talked earlier. The standard uses the process approach which we talked earlier. Process emphasizes risk-based thinking which we talked earlier. Now here we are talking about PDCA cycle. That is also the basis of ISO 9001 standard. So here on this slide, you see various clauses of ISO 9001 standard. So ISO 9001 2015 version has 10 clauses. Out of these 10 clauses, the first 3 clauses are more of an administrative clauses, which will talk about the purpose, scope, which will talk about the references, and which talks about the definitions. So those are not the requirements. The actual requirements start from clause number 4 to clause number 10. So if we look at these 7 clauses on which the companies need to act to implement ISO 9001 standard, they fit into the PDCA cycle. Let's say the clause number 5, which is leadership, is basically the core component. Leadership is the base, it's the core of this whole process. But then when it comes to the planning part, the clause number 4, which is the context of the organization, and clause number 6, which is planning. So these 2 clauses basically cover the planning part of PDCA cycle. The doing part is covered in clause number 7, which is the support, and clause number 8, which is the operation. Clause number 8, operation, is a very big clause, as you will see when we go into the details. So there are a lot of components in clause number 8, which is related to the operation, doing the things which company is doing. Now the check part is covered in clause number 9, which is the performance evaluation, and clause number 10, which is improvement, is for the act phase of PDCA cycle. So these clauses fit into the PDCA framework. So when we will be looking at these clauses, think about the PDCA cycle as well, that in these clauses we are planning, in these clauses we are doing something, this clause covers the check part, and this clause covers the act part of that. So 9001 standard is based on PDCA cycle as well. So previously we talked about some basic concepts such as 7 quality management principles. We talked about the process approach, risk-based thinking, and PDCA cycle. So all these concepts are basically the foundation of ISO 9001 standard. And once we go into the detail of that, you will recognize these things, that these are the basic foundation of ISO 9001. Now in this video, I want to talk about another terminology which was introduced in 2015 version. Now before 2015, ISO 9001 used to have documents and records. So there were 2 terms there. Documents was something which was the companies were expected to follow. These were the procedures or instructions. And then in addition to documents, there was another term called record. Records were something which were the proof of the activity being done. So there were 2 terms, documents and records. In 2015, what ISO 9000 did was they combined these 2 terms, the documents and records, into a single term which is called as the documented information. Because many of the requirements related to documents and records were similar, so they combined them and called them as documented information. When you look at the term documented information in the standard, you will have 2 thoughts, whether this is an instruction or the document, or whether this is a record of activity being performed. When you look at the standard, you will see that when it refers to the documented information, it asks for 2 things. One is maintain documented information, or second thing is retain documented information. So when the standard talks about maintain documented information, think of this as the document or the instructions or the procedures when it says maintain. On the other hand, when the standard says retain, it refers to the record. So you need to retain those records. So when in the ISO 9001 standard, you look at the requirement which says that the company shall retain documented information, that means it is talking about a record. It is talking about a record that particular activity has been performed or has been done. And for that, company need to keep some evidence. So that is the retained documented information part. Now, when you look at the standard, there are various places where it will say maintain documented information. So when the standard says maintain documented information, that means those are the compulsory documents company need to produce. For example, let's say in clause number 4.3, it says maintain documented information related to the scope of the QMS. So when you are setting up QMS, what is the scope of that? So standard says that you need to maintain documented information. That means you need to have a procedure, instructions, or a process which says that what is the scope of the quality management system. So you need to make a document related to that. So these are the mandatory documents. So here on this slide, I have listed down all the mandatory documents which company need to produce. It includes the quality policy, quality objectives, and so on. So there are some documents which company need to produce compulsorily, and you would see that quality manual is not a part of maintaining documented information. That means it is not compulsory for company to make a quality manual, which used to be a requirement earlier, but after 2015 that is not a requirement. So a quality manual is a high level manual of the quality management system. If companies want, they can make it. If you don't want, don't make it. So this is the list of compulsory or mandatory documents. And when you look at the retained documented information, there are a lot of places where the standard says that the company should retain documented information. That means company should keep a record of these, that these things have happened. And here is a slightly bigger list of items for which the company need to keep a record. Let's say 7.2 says the evidence of competence of people who are doing the job. That is something for which the company need to keep a record of that. Or let's say in 9.3, it says management review results. So when the management review happens, the result of that particular record needs to be kept by the company. So this is retained documented information. So these are mandatory records that company needs to retain if they claim to say that they are implementing ISO 9001 standard. So this was about the documented information. We talked about maintaining and retaining documented information. Maintain documented information equal to making a procedure, making a document. Retain documented information means making a record or making a checklist or making some proof that this activity has been done.